Today we're going to dive into Lightroom. We're going to look at 5 different tricks that I use pretty much every time I come to edit a series of photos. It's Tutorial Tuesdays. Welcome back to Tutorial Tuesday, where each and every Tuesday we bring you a brand new, fresh photography tutorial. Now, if that sounds good, maybe consider subscribing to the channel so you don't miss an episode. Today's one is going to be all about Lightroom. We're going to look at 5 tricks that I use pretty much every time I come to edit a series of photos in Lightroom. You might be thinking to yourself, why are we calling these tricks and not tips? Great question. To be fair, that is a great question. But the reason is these are not your average Lightroom tips that you see on YouTube. Stuff like, how to crop or using different grids over the photo or whatever, something like that. We actually have a video like that, 10 tips for Lightroom, which I'll pop a link to down in the description so you can check that out if you want. But no, these are more kind of tricks that I use using the different tools within Lightroom to create certain looks, certain effects, and I use these all the time. I really do use these on all kinds of different photos because they're very helpful things that I've kind of picked up along the way using Lightroom. So rather than sit here explaining what we're about to do, let's just dive in and start editing these photos. So first up, we've got this photo here, and the very first trick that I want to talk about is actually using the radial filters to make the subject of your photo pop. In this photo, we've got this nice swan with the little baby swans. There's the ducks over there, and to be honest, I would probably clone out the ducks for the finished photo, but for the purposes of this, we're going to stay in Lightroom, and I want to show you how we're going to use the radial filter to really make the swan the proper focal point, the subject of this image. We're going to use 2 radial filters. So first of all, let's come up here to the radial filter. We've got our settings all kind of neutral, all set at 0, and let's just draw a nice circle there and then move it so it's over the swan. Let's just make that a little bit bigger. And then the first thing we're going to do is we're going to bring the exposure down. So that's going to reduce the exposure everywhere except that circle. So it's affecting all of the image apart from that circle. We're going to bring it right down to something like that. We can always go back and adjust it later if we want to. Now, let's click new just here to create a new radial filter. We're going to draw another nice circle, pop it over the swan. This time, we're going to click the little invert symbol down here. And now it's going to affect just what's inside the circle. And let's bring that exposure up a little bit. Let's click done to see what that looks like. Immediately, that has made a huge difference to the photo. The swan is definitely the subject, the focal point of the photo. If we come up here to the radial filter again and we click that, we can come down to this little toggle here and just click that to see what it was like before we used those radial filters and then after. Now you may think the effect is too much. You can obviously go back. For the purposes of this video, I think this demonstrates it really well. I use this all the time to actually really highlight the subject of my photo, to really draw the viewer's eye there. You can always go back and find the little kind of circle bit there, click on it, and then you can just adjust the settings after the fact as well, which is nice to be able to do. Click done. I think that looks really good. I'd probably then go in and, like I say, clone out the ducks to really make the swan and the baby swans, really pop as the subject, get rid of everything else on the water. But I think this really highlights exactly how I do it. Now, this is perfect for portraits. This is actually great for landscape as well. I found myself really wanting to focus in on whatever the subject of the landscape is, and I use a little bit of this to highlight that. We've actually got a whole video about how to find a subject within a landscape, so you can go check that out as well. But this is a great tool for actually really highlighting that subject. Now, the next trick I want to talk about is actually using the graduated filter to create the effect of sunlight coming in from one side, from kind of diagonally onto the photo, through the trees, anything like that. Now, this works best if you can use it in conjunction with actual sunlight. So if you've got directional sunlight from one side of the photo, this is going to look better because it's going to look way more natural. But I use this all the time just to create an extra dimension for the photo, just to create something extra special. So for example, I've got this photo here. We're going to come up to the graduated filter up in the top right. All of our settings are at 0. And let's bring that in from kind of the right here on a diagonal kind of filter like that, because that's roughly how the light is falling into the photo. And then we can just bring up the exposure a little bit. Now that's the obvious way of doing things, right? But I like to also just bring down the dehaze a little bit because it kind of gives that effect of sun rays coming in. It kind of gives that feeling to the photo. You could even add a bit of warmth to this as well, just to really kind of sell the warm sunlight coming in. Now let's turn that off and then back on and see how that looks. I think that looks really good. I think that really kind of affects the photo with it looking like more sun coming in from the right. Now, like I say, this works best in this photo because it is working with real sunlight to create the effect. We can also paint on this kind of effect using an adjustment brush if we want to create kind of rays of sunlight rather than just a straight graduated filter of that. So the next trick is using dehaze to actually create kind of a misty, foggy effect in the photo. Now again, this works better if you are kind of enhancing what's already there. If you're just trying to add fog onto a really beautiful sunset, it's not going to work as well because that's just how things are. But if you're adding it onto a situation where there was already kind of a little bit of mist or fog or it kind of felt that way, you can get some really great results. So for example, here in this photo, it wasn't super misty or foggy, but it was a little bit grey. It wasn't the best conditions in terms of light, but it kind of lends itself really well. It's that kind of foggy, misty feel. So let's go ahead and add some in now. So let's go ahead and use the graduated filter first of all. We've got all our settings at 0 here. If you don't, by the way, you can just double click on the word effect here and it'll set everything to 0. So let's just change these up a little bit so you can see what I mean. Double click on the effect, sets everything back to 0. Now let's bring this in from, let's start off by bringing this in from the bottom and then bring the dehaze down a little bit. And then we can always move this as we need to. And then let's do a similar thing where we bring it in from the top down. And I think that immediately looks pretty good. But what we can do just to sell this a little bit further even is come down here to the range mask, come to luminance. And this is going to allow us to affect different parts of the photo with the mask based on how bright they are. So if we just want to affect the sky, for example. So let's bring the bottom part of this up so we're not affecting the darkest part of the image with these masks here. I think that looks pretty good. Let's turn this off and then back on. Now let's go to the adjustment brush and let's do a similar thing. We're going to paint in a similar sort of thing here. So I'm going to actually bring the dehaze down before I start painting here. I've got a decent sized brush, but you can adjust that with the mouse scroll wheel. And then let's just paint some stuff in here. We can always come back and change things. So I'm being a little bit slapdash here, but I think it's going to be okay. Let's bring that dehaze back up a little bit. I think the effect is probably a little bit too strong. Let's paint a little bit in the sky as well. We don't want to, just have it on the water because there would be a bit of fog in the sky, right? So let's do that. Let's come down here to the range mask, the luminance, and let's just bring up that a little bit. And let's turn that off, turn that back on. You can see that's kind of affecting it, creating more of a mist. Now we could go even further with this stuff, right? We could paint all across the sky, get rid of all this sort of blue and make it a really minimalist style photo where we're really focused in. I actually really like that, where we've got a lot of white there now on just the pier and these poles kind of sticking through this kind of white misty feel. But if we were to go back, if we press Y and see before and after, this is the photo that I actually took originally, and then I did a little bit of editing before I came to do this, and this is where we're at now. I think it looks really good. Let's just come down and add a little auto transform to this, which I think is going to help it out a little bit. But I really think that looks good. That mist, that kind of foggy mist feel has really added quite a lot to that photo. So next up, let's talk about how you can adjust colors in the photo locally. So what I mean by that is if you want to go ahead and adjust the hue, and I'm going to show you exactly what I'm talking about here. If you want to go ahead and adjust the hue in this photo of the orange, because we want these lights on the left here to be kind of a darker, richer orange, we would normally go down to the HSL tab, we go to hue, bring that orange down, but you can see it's affecting the skin tone of our model there. It's really, really affecting her skin tone because obviously it would, right? That's generally the channel that her skin tone would be in. So we need to be able to adjust the hue of those lights without affecting her at all. We didn't used to be able to do that in Lightroom. You had to take it into Photoshop or something like that. But now we can come up here to the adjustment brush. Let's just double click effect to set everything back to 0. We can press O so that we can see the mask that we're going to paint on. And we can start painting on here for these lights, making sure not to paint onto our model there. And let's press O again. So we get rid of that so we can actually see what we're doing now. And then we've got this new thing here. It's not that new now, to be fair, but it's new compared to a couple of years ago, let's say. We've got this hue slider. Now we've also got this use fine adjustment little tick box here. So we can actually now just change the hue of what we've just painted. So if you see as I do that, the color's going mad. So let's double click that to reset it. Let's click use fine adjustment. What that's going to do is essentially slow down the speed that we're able to move this slider. Let's move it a little bit to the left just to really make this orange a little bit richer, a little bit kind of darker, richer orange. There we go, quite like that. Let's turn that off so you can see what we've done, and on. It's a relatively subtle change that we've done, but you can see that we've done that without affecting our model at all. Now that's a very subtle use of this, but you could use this to do all kinds of things. Change the color of plants, change pretty much anything you want. Change the color of clothes, but without affecting anything else in the image. It's a really useful tool to have, and to be honest, it's been a long time coming. I think it's something that we've needed in Lightroom for a long time because it means you don't have to use Photoshop. You can really keep everything within Lightroom. It's super helpful. This is a very kind of basic use of it, but it really is a very powerful tool. And the last trick, and this is quite a powerful one actually, so you have to be a little bit careful with it, is using the tone curve to really affect the colors in your image. So obviously with the tone curve, usually we might use something like an S curve to add a bit of contrast. Super great. But if you do that within the different color channels, so the red, the green, the blue, you can really affect the colors of the image. And very helpfully now, when you actually click on here, so I'm going to use it on this photo here, but when you click on these different colors, the red, the green, the blue, you actually get a little bit of a display of what it's going to do by moving the actual curve. So you've got, for example, on the red channel, if we move it up, it's going to be more sort of red. If we move it down, it's going to be more sort of cyan. Same with green. If we move it up, it's going to be green. Down, it's going to be sort of magenta. Blue, up is blue, down is yellow. So with a combination of that, you can create some really interesting color grades, but also add contrast to your image. So for example, on this image, let's just draw a sort of standard S curve on the red channel. So that's going to add a little bit of contrast. I already quite like the color grade of that. It's a little bit kind of green compared to where it was. See, that's made a big difference. Let's go into the green channel, bring the shadows down, push those highlights back up. Again, I already really like that before we've even gone into the blue channel. So let's turn that off, turn it back on. It's made a big difference. Let's go into that blue channel. Let's bring the shadows down again towards the yellow. Again, I like how that is. So there's a lot of color grades we could have done here, and then bring that up in the highlights. Now we've added a lot of contrast to our image. Let's turn off the whole tone curve, turn it back on. But we've also played around a little bit with the color. And now that you've kind of set yourself up with these kind of basic S curves across the different color channels, you can play around with that a little bit. So for example, I quite liked bringing this down in the shadows towards the yellow, and we could probably bring that down a little bit in the magenta as well. And that looks really nice. But we could similarly, we could bring that up a little bit in the shadows towards the more sort of blue and bring that up for a little bit more green. I really like the look of that as well. So it's very powerful. It's something you have to be careful with and make small adjustments and see what it looks like, because you really can easily go overboard with it. If I look at before and after of this photo, we've not made too much of a difference there now that I've played around with it a little bit more. There's a touch more contrast. The colors are a little bit different, but I really enjoy playing around with this. You can get some really interesting color grades, kind of stylize your photo a little bit. I really, really like it. I really like it as a tool for editing your photo. There's lots of things you can do. I mean, that's just a basic S curve. You could come in and add kind of some green to the midtones, or perhaps you want to add some yellow to the midtones, blue, whatever you want. There's a lot you can do just using the different color channels within the tone curve. So those are 5 tricks that I use pretty much every time I come to edit a series of photos. I won't use every one on every photo, obviously, but they're a useful box of tricks, if you like, to use on different photos, because they can really enhance the end result of a photo. And I really enjoy the editing process. So some of these are quite fun to use as well. But if you have any tricks of your own, any tips, anything at all, pop it down in the comments. Do you already use some of these? Do you have any thoughts on any of the ones that we've been talking about here? I'd love to hear down in the comments. Of course, if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like and subscribe. There's a full list of everything used for the different photos down in the description as well, so you can go and check out the cameras and lenses and all that kind of fun stuff. I will see you in the next video, and as always, thanks for watching.